Welcome, everyone. I'm Adam Kalunga, president and founder of the Truth and Accountability Project, and this is the debut episode of our new show, Insight Politics. This is going to be a weekly show for now where we discuss the political issues that are facing Americans, and as always, advocate for democracy, truth, accountability, and transparency in government. This show is going to be available across all our social media platforms and on our website. I'm very happy to say that our first guest is Representative James Walkinshaw from Virginia's 11th District. Without further ado, let's welcome Representative Walkinshaw to the show. All right, joining me now is Representative James Walkinshaw from Virginia's 11th District. James, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you. All right, obviously, there's a lot I want to touch on, but first, I want to talk about Iran. So on March 17th, after the resignation of National Counterterrorism Director Joe Kent, Speaker Johnson said, and this is a quote, "I'm on the Gang of Eight. I get all the briefings. We all understand there was clearly an imminent threat." The very next day, DNI Tulsi Gabbard testified under oath that Iran did not pose an imminent threat and they were not rebuilding their nuclear facilities. Has this administration advised Congress of any imminent threat from Iran?
Absolutely not. I've been in a number of classified briefings and obviously can't talk about what was said in those briefings, but I can say unequivocally, from my perspective, they have not laid out evidence of an imminent threat. And look, everybody knew that, Iran has had a nuclear program. They've wanted to maintain their nuclear program. They would have loved and loved to be able to have a nuclear weapon at some point. That's been an ambition of theirs. We
Right.
know that they've been sponsors of terrorism in the region and around the globe, but all of that was true a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, including during President Trump's first term. There
Right.
was nothing significant that changed to precipitate President Trump's decision to go to war with Iran this month.
Okay. And also, I'm glad you mentioned Trump going to war with Iran because on March 4th, or March 5th, sorry, after the War Powers Resolution failed in Congress, Speaker Johnson stated, "We are not at war. We have no intention of being at war. This is a limited operation. It's limited in its scope and duration. It has a very clear mission." So, are we at war? Has this administration provided Congress any details on what the very clear mission is and what the limitations on its scope and duration might be?
Yeah, that was quite a statement you just read from Speaker Johnson because literally every piece of that was false. He
Right.
says we're not at war. It's quite clear that we're at war. Everyone can see the videos, the massive buildup of troops and arms in the Middle East, the 13 American service members who have lost their lives. This is a war. There was no imminent threat to the United States. There wasn't a clear threat, as Speaker Johnson claimed that there was. And his claim that there was a clear goal or strategy is also false. The administration has given shifting explanations and rationales in
Yeah.
terms of why we're there and what the goals are. They started out talking about regime change and encouraging the people of Iran to rise up and help us to change that regime. They've completely backed off of that.
Yeah.
Now they talked about eliminating the nuclear threat. We know that Iran's nuclear material is now likely buried under the rubble that our airstrikes have created.
Hmm.
Impossible or nearly impossible for us to get it and remove it. So we haven't succeeded there. We haven't eliminated their threat to our allies in the region. Quite the opposite.
Right.
Our allies in the region are under attack now because of this war and Iran's response. So everything Speaker Johnson said was wrong there. Other than that, he got it right, I guess.
All right. And I'm glad you brought up our allies being under attack in the region because Trump keeps saying that we've won this war, the war is over. We've destroyed their Navy. We've destroyed their Air Force. But the New York Times just came out with an article yesterday stating that 13 U.S. bases across the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar are completely uninhabitable, with buildings destroyed, radar sites destroyed, runways destroyed, and they're actually seeking alternative locations to house our troops in the
Right.
area. So
Right.
how can we have the war won, yet our bases are still under threat of Iranian missile and drone attack?
Yeah, our bases are under a threat. Our allies are under threat and under attack. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed by the Iranians.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, we're winning. And look, I think the administration has made kind of a very classic and fundamental strategic error here. They've looked at it through the lens of conventional warfare, right? So
Yep.
we destroyed perhaps their conventional navy to the extent that they had one. We have dominance and complete control of the skies over Iran right now. Yes, that's true. We've eliminated some of their advanced ballistic missile capacity. If you look at those conventional measures,
Mhm.
we're succeeding, but predictably, the Iranians are responding to our conventional attacks with unconventional asymmetric warfare.
Right.
So they're sending up drones from the back of a pickup truck that cost them $5,000 or $10,000 to produce, and we're trying to intercept those drones with $4 million Patriot missiles. Um, I don't know. I don't know whether we're winning if we're spending $4 million to
This
intercept a $10,000 drone. That's not a sustainable approach for much longer.
right. And that's a point I've made before on my channel that Iran was never going to fight a conventional war. And going into this with a mind frame that Iran is going to somehow fight a conventional war with 50-year-old Soviet equipment, like 1970s era jets and tanks, it was never going to happen. And their one strategic advantage, I'm glad you brought up, is the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
And that's the one thing everyone knew they were going to do to put economic pressure on not only the United States, but the rest of the world to stop the bombing on their country, was make this so economically unfeasible for everyone. But somehow this administration didn't see that coming.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to fathom whether they either didn't see it coming or foolishly chose to ignore it. And I
Right.
think, what happened here, probably the simplest explanation is that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth and others in the administration, they got high on their own supply after Venezuela
Venezuela,
and
yeah.
relatively, an impressive military operation. I'm opposed to what they did, but an impressive military operation in Venezuela to go in pretty quickly and snatch the president and then install presumably a more compliant leader in
Yeah.
Venezuela. And I think they thought that they would be able to do something similar in Iran, that some other leader would emerge that
Right.
would be more amenable to US interests or to Donald Trump's whims. And
Mhm.
that was a foolish and reckless assumption to make, but I think it's most likely the assumption that they made.
I think so. And that's one thing you never know with this administration. Is it arrogance or is it incompetence? And I
Right.
think I think you could say that about almost every
Yeah, it's
decision they
usually
make.
both. Yeah.
Yeah, or both most of
Yeah.
the time. And so there are obviously fundamental differences between Iran and Venezuela. And what they're doing with Venezuela would never be able to happen in Iran. I mean, even I know that Iran has contingency after contingency after contingency to replace their leadership. Like the leadership chain goes four or
Right.
five deep. And it seems like the further you go down it, the more fanatical they get. So
Right.
there was never really a chance that they could install a regime friendly to the United States. I mean, we're talking about a country that is a religious fundamentalist theocracy. with a deep hatred of the United States for the last 50 years, like,
That's right.
or even longer. Like, what would make this administration even think that they could institute regime change in a country like Iran?
Yeah, and look, I think the tragedy is there were other paths and options that we could take. And look, I'd love to see different leaders of Iran, right? I would love to see the regime that's in place there replaced by a
Yeah,
group of people who, are going to try to meet the democratic aspirations of many of the people of Iran and
right,
be, better players on the global stage. But that is really something that would have to come about internally in Iran.
right,
And, I'm a co-sponsor of several bills here in Congress that would have put in place the technology to prevent the regime from shutting off the internet in Iran and
mm,
shutting down communications because when they've had these protests and
hmm,
democratic movements, the regime has been able to cut them off, A, with extreme brutality,
right,
and B, making it impossible for them to communicate with each other and organize. So my view is, let's use the technological um, assets that the United States has to make it so that all of those who want freedom in Iran can communicate and organize amongst themselves. That's what the regime fears the most. It's kind of, unfortunately, another instance of hubris on behalf of the United States of America and thinking that we can go in
right.
and refashion the leadership or government of a country in the Middle East. We just haven't been successful at doing that for
Yeah,
hundreds of years. I'm
yeah,
not sure why we think we would be successful starting today.
yeah, especially by dropping bombs on them. Like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
All right. So we're
Yeah.
about to enter the fifth week of the war in Iran. What impacts are you seeing on your constituents, and how is this affecting the American people?
Well, I have constituents who have been deployed to the Middle East, who are away from their families,
Mhm.
uh, who are at risk. So that's first and foremost the way that it's impacted my constituents. I have constituents just like everywhere in the country who are, looking at $4 a gallon gas prices
Yeah,
right now.
$5
We're
a gallon.
$5. Yeah, thankfully we haven't seen $5 yet in Virginia, but we're headed in that direction. If
No,
this continues, we're spending by some measures $2 billion a day. I mentioned, using $4 million Patriot missiles to shoot down
right.
$10,000 drones. That's continuing. So there's the economic impact. There's the impact on the federal budget that we're going to see. The White House is preparing to ask Congress for $200 billion in supplemental funding to pay for this. Just to put that into context, that could fund the Affordable Care Act premium tax credits that we argued about for, I think,
Yeah,
7 years.
yeah,
It could buy free school lunches for every child in the United States, every single child in the United States, probably for multiple years. So there's a huge opportunity cost that we're looking at. And we're hearing and seeing just like flashing red lights about the state of the economy. And
yeah,
this has been a huge shock to the economy in the United States and across the globe.
right.
And if we continue, it's just going to get worse.
Yeah. So basically, it could be funding all the things that they said we didn't have money to fund when
That's
Trump was
right.
passing his big, terrible bill.
That's right.
Now he wants to spend that on a reckless, senseless war.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So you stated in the past that this is the most corrupt administration that you've ever seen, a statement that I wholeheartedly agree with. And one of the most corrupt officials in this administration, obviously other than Trump himself, is Kristi Noem. And she may be out at DHS, but there is still a lingering, I guess,
Yep.
air of corruption over that department. Can you talk a little bit about that and the $220 million contract that apparently she didn't know anything about,
Right.
even though she says she personally signs off on any expense over $100,000?
Yep. Yeah, and the corruption with this administration, as you noted, starts at the top with Donald J. Trump, and he has enriched himself and his family by at least $1 billion just in the
Yeah.
year plus
Hmm.
couple months that he's been in office. This time he's basically been selling the Oval Office to the highest bidder, accepting
Right.
huge gifts, including cash from foreign leaders. It is outrageous the way he's personally enriched himself.
Hmm.
But others in the administration have been following his example.
Right.
Kristi Noem and her right-hand man at DHS, Corey Lewandowski, are the most recent examples. And the $220 million, I think, is a massive and emerging scandal.
Yep.
And what happened is that Kristi Noem decided she wanted to do a national advertising campaign,
Hmm.
ostensibly to tout the administration's immigration policies. But all of us probably saw those commercials, and
Yeah.
most of them are they're 60-second commercials, and it's 45 seconds of Kristi Noem riding on
Riding
horseback,
on a horse.
uh, with Mount Rushmore, basically setting her up for her presidential campaign, and then
Yeah.
maybe 15 seconds of talking about the failed immigration policies of this administration. But that $220 million, rather than doing what the law requires, what you would typically do in government, and say we're going to have a competitive bidding process to
Right.
make sure taxpayers get the best possible deal to
Hmm.
do this. They didn't have a competitive bidding process. They allowed only a handful of companies that were closely tied to Nome and other Republican leaders to submit proposals. Much of the money, 140-ish million dollars of it, ended up
Hmm.
being funneled through a secretive Delaware shell company that was created just for this purpose and ended up going to the political strategy firm of Kristi Noem's spokesperson's husband,
Right.
same firm that got $8.5 million of South Dakota taxpayer money.
Hmm.
So it's clear, I think, and there's a pattern of Kristi Noem funneling taxpayer money to her political allies and her friends. That's on top of what we learned recently about Corey Lewandowski, who had, we believe, the secretary's authority to sign off on any contract at DHS over $100,000.
So that was
There
Lewandowski.
Lewandowski, yeah. There are credible allegations from businesses, corporations that were seeking DHS contracts that he basically asked for payoffs. And if they didn't provide those payoffs, they wouldn't get their contracts with DHS. So that's being investigated. Democrats on the Oversight Committee and the Homeland Security Committee, both of which I'm on, are investigating that. The Inspector General at DHS is investigating that. And that's one of those issues that, with Democratic control of the Congress, the House of Representatives next year, we're going to
Yep.
have to fully investigate with subpoenas and hearings to figure out what laws were broken and who broke the law.
Well, that's good. And hopefully that happens. And that I want to say that's why this November election is so important because right now this Republican-controlled Congress is basically giving this administration a free pass. No oversight, no accountability, and because of that, we are seeing things like this.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, James. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for making time for us today, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Well, that was great insight from Representative Walkinshaw. Once again, I would like to thank him for joining the show. And to wrap it up, what else can we say about this administration other than they are a complete mess? They went into this war with Iran with no clear objectives, no stated goals, and despite what Speaker Johnson says, this mission or war is definitely not limited in its scope and duration. This administration has no idea how long this is going to last. Trump keeps saying we've won, Iran's military is destroyed, but at the same time, we're sending 10,000 more ground troops to the Middle East. He says Iran's military is completely wiped out. They have no capabilities, no air capabilities, no naval capabilities. Yet U.S. bases in the Middle East continue to be hit by missile and drone attacks. And then the one thing that everyone knew was going to happen, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, is the one thing that this administration did not prepare for. And now they are literally begging the rest of the world to help. I mean, everyone knew Iran was never going to wage a conventional war against the United States with 60-year-old military equipment, right? 70s era Soviet equipment. Their one advantage is their geography. Their geographic location is the one strategic advantage Iran has. Shutting down that strait has the ability to create global chaos, especially in the energy markets, and drive up the cost of living for the entire world. And that's exactly what they're doing, and it's exactly what Trump and Hegseth didn't prepare for, either through arrogance or incompetence. Probably a mixture of both. But that's where we are today. Thank you for joining me, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Again, this is Insight Politics. I'm Adam Kalunga, founder of the Truth and Accountability Project, and I'll talk to you guys next week.